Chile here with Sirius Dallas Moon, and we have Midheaven 29 degrees Sagittarius, Ascendant 28 degrees Pisces, Jupiter in Cancer, Mars our Saturn day, and Mars is 26 degrees Pisces with the Ascendant Moon 19 degrees Scorpio, Saturn ingress to degree 6, slowly separating from the sextile to Pluto, Venus ingress to degree 6, slowly separating from the square to Pluto. And I want to talk about how discontinuation of the lineage is materialized from a metaphysical point of view. So, Neptune in the sign of Aries really emphasizes metaphysical studies because Neptune is beyond the physical and Aries rules the mind, but Mars also rules the physical, the materialization of something. Both Saturn and Mars are associated with something being materialized. Mars is action. Mars in Aries is the physical. And Saturn is the accumulation of actions. Saturn is Rahu, ruling over Rahu. Now, when we take a look about the accumulation of actions, of metaphysically targeting people since infanthood, raping them, trafficking them, depriving them of sleep, whether targeting by blood or simply because um, this is funded by, because the targeting is funded by classified projects, and this deteriorates the wealth of humanity from various perspectives. It deprives people of access to care that is actually caring, love that is actually loving, housing, the ability to work, the joy of living. And then what happens to the people that are targeted in that way? They begin to manifest, to long for the end of their suffering and the discontinuation of these practices. Um, this is how total lineages, cultures, languages, beliefs are being entering the metaphysical phase of being transmuted to extinction. Because what happens to the targeted people? They manifest ending their targeting, of course, and they manifest ending the practices of targeting individuals. They begin to feel that euthanasia is the greatest value to offer the world. They begin to feel that why are babies being born when this world is like that? Why do people bring children, or are these children born not at all with volition of the parents? They begin to see infanticide as euthanasia. And they begin to manifest that those who profit off of such practices will have their lineages discontinued. So it will not be economic for them to practice um, such practices. Now, I notice that sometimes people want to even die, but it's not possible because they're meant to stay alive and manifest the death of those who practice those practices of targeting individuals. They're actually, and it's terrible suffering because the person already wants to end suffering, but are not allowed to die as they are like walking talismans of the ruin of the legacies, lineages, cultures, and societies that practice targeting individuals, or energy siphoning, or trafficking, or slavery, prevention of sleep torture. So we have masses upon masses of people from all types of origins. It can be elite infants and children. It could be people who have bloodlines of elite and they don't know it. It could be people that are actually considered not part of the elite, and it can be practiced as um, racism, and it can be practiced as what people believe is upbringing. And whatever the cause is, that we have a beyond imaginable number of individuals that holds a frequency is not allowed to actually die in a way that's, death with dignity. And it holds a frequency of manifesting the end. Because the only thing that can alleviate the suffering is meditating on, let's say, mass anonymous graves of those who practice targeting individuals. Now, Neptune and Aries also adds the veil of ignorance, whether it is by technology or by occultistic practices of people torturing people and then cloaking themselves in their identity as they come to torture more people. And so what happens is that if people are targeted by that, they realize that even if they see the face of someone or the energy of someone, it might not be them, but it might be that somebody tortures both them and the other person and cloak themselves in one another's identity to try to make them target each other. Um, so they begin to manifest that the lineages of people that practice those practices without knowing, they don't know to name specific lineages. And this is where it goes beyond, let's racism or anti Semitism or genderism, but into the veil of ignorance. It's kind of like anybody, any lineage, any bloodline that practices those practices of targeting individuals, of torture, of slavery, of trafficking, of preventing sleep, of all these things are discontinued. And it's not about revenge. With Neptune, we don't necessarily, there's a helplessness that just wants to end the problem or the situation terminally. Okay, the problem of targeting individuals to end that terminally. And so, by lineage of whoever is profiting off of these practices, for all those lineages to be discontinued. Now, here's the thing: there's many people, they don't know who are those lineages. They don't know, and they can exempt the people who are against these practices. Now, what happens is that that frequency is basically beginning to be practiced, um, even with non-attachment, because people feel, and basically the frequency of masses of lineages becoming mass graves until the practice of targeting individuals, trafficking, and so on is stopped. Um, but particularly the lineages that practice, the lineages that are discontinued turn to mass graves, and the dissolution of their lineage, of their legacies. That whatever they seek to build by targeting individuals dissolves. And so the people that are targeted, which is so many people, so many cultures, the only thing that can calm them somewhat is to begin to meditate on like mass graves of those who targeted them. Not as suffering, not as revenge, but as euthanasia. This is also creating a miraculous healing of intergenerational curses because, or lineage curses, because Saturn can be a lineage curse. Mars is the breaking off. And with Mars, Saturn in Mars sign is the breaking of a curse on the lineage, whether it's by this lineage being discontinued, and so people no longer having to suffer, um, trafficking or targeting or experiments that are done on them. And this is particularly harmful to the people that entered into the teeter tatter, which means that they thought that, oh, they were enslaved in the past, now they're going to enslave others. So it's miraculous healing also of the perpetuation of war. It's miraculous healing for people that were victims of abuse to see the calmness of mass graves of offenders and people that said that they were um, falsely accusing when they spoke up about their abuse, taking into account that that's a structure, not singling out or even targeting an individual. And even if mentioning names, mentioning that hey, these people were also tortured, and seeing the mass graves of all the people that put them through this because they profited off, because they wanted to inherit the house, because, or even because they saw them as sheeple, or because if it's people that are targeted and they were part of the elite, because people just thought that this is the way to raise children, or I don't know. But to see all of that discontinued is nervous system regulation, which is essential in preventing inflammation. And this is how mass death of those who practice targeting individuals, using dark occult against them, and then blaming them. If you think about like King James, that um, basically tortured, even though he was gay, tortured women and siphoned their energy. Basically, what was called a witch hunt. And he blamed those women for being witches when his homosexual cults were basically targeting women. He was not just like a gay person that deserves LGBTQ rights. He was basically trafficking men in order for them to have, let's say, a job at the kingdom. And then he was hunting women for being witches while he practiced energy siphoning. Um, and this is why he's remembered in that way, rather than as a unifier of a kingdom who signed peace with Spain and wanted to make the rights of the Scottish people equal. He cannot make equal rights when he obliterates the feminine. And so this is also what happens to the so-called legacies of the people who practice those practices, which basically mean they siphon off of energy of individuals, they rape, they torture, they traffic, they prevent sleep, they prevent housing, they prevent access to help, and then they blame the people that they basically targeted. Um, and it creates a frequency of what Beta per se is about, which is dead bodies upon dead bodies. Situation that the currencies that the people that are targeted um, are excluded from become inflated, they become unsuffice, and the produce, the food, becomes poisoned to those that practice those practices. Because what does it do? It basically prevents absorption of minerals. And this is basically um, how mass death of cultures, of lineages, is coming about from the metaphysical into actual reality. And there are many junctures where that could be stopped, where that could be transmuted, where that could be alleviated, where that could be um, not occurring. All of those junctures necessitate zero rape, zero slavery, zero energy siphoning society without distinction between anything that would be of justification to commit such atrocities. And this is how people are kind of like, they were not even allowed to, let's say, have death with dignity, so they just stay alive, meditating on mass death, painting mass death, writing mass death, singing mass death of the people that practice those practices against them, consecrating mass death, um, and spend their every waking life, because if they have sleep prevention, then what would they do with their time but manifest mass death of those who practice those practices? And these are so many people that this is their lives. And the more that they are, I don't know, isolated, or then they begin to hold more and more of that frequency, which is a metaphysics, a manifestation into matter of dead bodies upon dead bodies. Right? Because what are these people to do? If I think about how King James died, he was basically everything, his legacy became the downfall of the kingdom because he practiced those practices. I held him accountable. He was there persecuting women, being a warlock and blaming them for being witches, and nobody was slaughtering him, executing him. Where were all the Scottish men? Now, because of this Neptune in Aries that where a person is targeted and they don't even know who or why or what for, or then they just want those who the entirety of everybody who is a part of that to basically go extinct, not as revenge, not by suffering, but to simply die. And that's going to manifest in people from all origins that were practicing those practices dying mass deaths. I remember there was a lady that was tortured, and I emphasize that she was tortured. Um, then um, she began to target me, and there were, I guess it works because there are secret societies. And then it was like she recently bought a house. Was at the party for um, basically and she said to me, "Oh my God, I'm so happy that you've been here and you're like a stable pole in my life." Where I was myself in like like in racks, like I was. And then she was tortured, and then she began to target me. But this whoever tortured her was torturing her to sacrifice me. And I know that in those societies, people actually have to do this to people that they care about or that they love. Now, even though she was tortured, eventually at the war, because there was an attempt to put me in the Nova Party, and there was an attempt, they wanted me to um, contact a woman um, that is an a woman, man, I don't know, gender nonconforming, and is an astrologer, and um, I was not the type of person to do that, but they really wanted me to contact her and like invite her to Israel. Um, and then there was a attempt that we would go to the Nova party, and I'm like, I'm not the type of, like, I don't know her very well. Like, it's in the beginning, it seems like okay, channeling's about socializing, and I was living next to the Dead Sea, so it seems like reasonable, but I was not a party person. Um, this is a person I knew through the astrology podcast, and she used to work in the pharmaceutical industry. She was open about working as a stripper, which was when we discontinued talking, where I said, hey, people talk about sex work is work, but they forget to mention that people don't actually have a choice. They are trafficked to work in those things. And then she just went from really appreciating me to not speaking with me more. And and then there were attempts that I would try to contact her, invite her to like Israel, and I'm like, this is so fucking weird. Um, so it also came from the astrology community. And around COVID, it may be that they had to sacrifice people to keep working. Um, so as per that astrologer, I don't think they were targeting, at least not me, because there was attempt for me to call them to parties so that we would be sacrificed or kidnapped. Um, and then I was not going out. Now the Israeli, basically, she later became something like a doula. But she started with reflexology, aromatherapy, and I was a student in aromatherapy. And later, only this year, I would see that one of her family members that was at the Nova got killed trying to save people. Um, and then she had a sister, and his sister was also doing like nice things. I don't know, with combination of astrology and natural fabrics and really interesting stuff with Disney. And I'm like, that sister was tortured. She was tortured because I know the symbolism. Disney is an MK Ultra where they train people to do with filmmaking, and the family member that was killed was a filmmaker. Now I was young filmmaker in my 20s. And then there was a community about somebody not being willing to sacrifice, basically human sacrifice. Um, I would only later understand that they meant me because I was not like I was not ready to sacrifice or to manhunt in order to have a house or real estate. Um, and I know why they were targeted because they talked about, and I remember that I talked about the fact that I went through the Me Too, and they talked about the fact that certain people in the astrological community are are doing things that are not to be, how should I say it, that they should not be doing. And so it's very plausible that she didn't want to continue with the corruption. Now, she came from the pharmaceutical company and she exposed a lot of the challenges and corruption there. So I'm sorry, but I also confused with my own pronouns. Um, because I'm unsure about, in my case, I don't know if there has to do with targeting or abuse, and the masculine traits were like a coping mechanism, because they also have ritual abuse that wants to turn people. Um, they particularly are set on pansexualism for extortion cults. So I'm sorry if I confuse somebody's pronouns. Um, and they were they were like we were appreciating one another because of this topic. We were both relating on the topic of, the corruption in the pharmaceutical family, in the pharmaceutical industry, where I was writing about the body mind, um, questioning the medicines, and I was targeted for that, but they were targeted, um, and they also spoke against certain things that were done in the astrological community. They did not name names, but it was clear that they're not compliant with, let's say, sex trafficking codes, even though they worked as stripper, and to fund studies or something, but they did not. It's not like it seemed like even as stripper, they were not willing to go the route of being a madam or a trafficker. Again, if somebody was hurt by this person, then I believe you. But they were. It seemed that they were coming against the corruption in that industry, and they wanted basically me and them to go to the Nova party. Now, I'm not a party girl. Um, I was living by the Dead Sea, and at the time we were no longer speaking because I confronted the issue around um, basically trafficking. Um, and and they just stopped talking to me. So I thought maybe they are offended, but I was also not willing to apologize for speaking about the fact that people don't actually have a choice, let's say, to fund a degree, particularly not in the United States. Um, and and we can glorify, um, you know, but that's um, but that that was it. And in retrospective, we were both not compliant with probably sex offenses, and that was or corruption in the medical industry, and that was what targeted us. I don't know where they are today. Um, their branding was something to do with office hours, because they also came from academia. Um, and it was really surreal. Realized that the person that will later become something like a doula, um, that they were afraid that they will take their profession too, or something like that, um, which they already did. That's why they were tortured to begin with. And it was very cool because that person was, they catch people when they level up. So I was beginning to really work on my business and do shadow work. Um, and they were buying a house. So they let them go through the purchase. They let them go through the purchase. They let them, trying to convince everyone, to level up and to pay attention to where they're living and so on. And they went through with a house purchase. They were a single woman that bought a house. It was so beautiful. Then they started having alopecia, and they were tortured, and they targeted probably their clients. Now, this is something I noticed, that businesses would be tortured and forced to target their clients, and so they could not profit. The business model will no longer be allowed to profit off of running a business, and then they will be profiting off of um, classified projects, which is MK Ultra and MK Often, which is Epstein ring and trafficking. And then what would happen? People would have their original ideas, their original this, their original that. Um, but even when people want to, let's say, buy from the business, or um, they are targeted when they buy from the business, and then the model is kind of like, is such that the person is entrapped in those trafficking cults, and they cannot even venture as a business because they were required to sacrifice their peers to keep a business, but they're no longer able to profit off of that business because they also have to siphon the energy and sacrifice their viewers or their clients. I know this only in retrospective. I understood that this was the business model for a lot of celebrities. Um, and because nobody would have like the chance to be a celebrity, it was so remote that the larger people weren't exposed to that. And as people began to quest for more independence, whether as business owners, content creators, and every business owner had to have a public persona by the brand and for quite some time by the face. Um, then people began to be similarly targeted because to begin with, the people went self-employed because they couldn't deal with the corruption at work, and for the most cases, or the conditions at work, whether it's single moms that needed working conditions that actually afford to raise a baby, so they needed to make more money per hour. And instead of trafficking, they began to um, market something that they're good at doing. And oh, heavens fall, they actually were quite successful. And then people actually began to make money off of social media, particularly during COVID. I remember when I was um, at the Facebook group of some lady, and I was like really into energy crystals or even taking a deck of like cards, not even tarot. And I was saying, okay, let's pick a card with a fun message, and then oh, pick a crystal, and by the color and by the type of the crystal, I knew what this person was manifesting, what this person was questing. People really loved that. And the person that had the group really loved that because I was bringing people to the group. And then the people that had crystal shops really loved that because I was bringing people to buy energy crystals and inviting them to seek ethically sourced crystals. And the people that sold all kinds of cards suddenly would have revenue because naturally people would buy another deck or another deck or begin to design one of their own decks. It's kind of like it was a booming industry. People began to make money off of trafficking by corporation or trafficking by trafficking codes. And then that was severely targeted. Even when certain social media disallowed something, then people would vote and opt for another social media. The big threat was to the people that needed to rape somebody to get a rank, or needed to sacrifice a person to have a business, or to even sacrifice their first child to maintain the family intergenerational wealth and consolidate wealth by ritual abuse. Class system really began to declassify, and then there was a declassification of basically what were the core issues, whether it was the Epstein files, and we have to take into account that the people in the elite were in those upbringings where they had to do that, and they were entrapped because they would have their viewers, their clients, and their peers, and they would have to keep sacrificing. It was like a quota, and they had to be competent and keep producing. If it is, let's say, academia, there was the salami method, which basically means that one research was split into topics, and people began to publish something that could be one article as 10 articles. And to get to Q1s, they had to write on particular topics. Um, for example, in political science, topics of voting patterns were much preferred over topics of freedom as movement, which, because the first is plain to those who um, loot the democratic system, whereas while they do definitely expose biases that people have upon voting patterns, identity is one of them. Family lineage, people would either rebel or connect with a family lineage. So those are important researches. However, if I take freedom as movement, um, if freedom as movement would have been, um, if this type of articles um, would have been way more, then perhaps it would be not just impossible to have a 75 years old open air prison, but also a 75 years old closed air prison of even Jewish women trafficked by Israel in Israel. Naturally, my thesis with the body mind question addresses the degrees of the levels of consciousness emerges in top down processes and basically is a scientific foundation for addressing not only social phenomena but also the effect on the body mind, which in Aries we see as inflammation that can create both psychiatric Neptune or surgery requiring Neptune type of medical conditions. Even astral rape can create um, can create inflammation that basically creates both mental and physical ailments, which is why sex work is not work. Um, and now, the more that those notions are oppressed within people, when I began to study the body mind question, it was also after that I took a break because of the Me Too, or because of what preceded the Me Too, and started learning about like embodied sexuality or what people call sex positive. And the question began to like curiously wonder like how can people claim to say that there is sex positive sex work where even in self pleasure when someone's not ready it creates inflammation, yeast, and upon yeast grows candida, upon candida grows cancer. And also, how can people be in front of a crowd, even let's say as a stripper, where a person can be dissociated from their own body, but to, let's say, dance or perform, they actually need to be really embodied. And the gaze, which is also touching on the Disney method, the gaze of the crowd is is creating a dissociation from the body. This was when this astrologer and stripper, that person that studied with the pharmaceutical companies, that's where they stopped talking with me. And I'm like, okay, they're triggered, but also it's kind of like I was just like curious, how can like are they not experiencing that, or like am I alone in that experience, or because this is what when I was so isolated and society was such a rape culture, I'm the only one who feels like that, or I'm the only one who thinks like that. And I was so gaslighted by women that claimed to be sex workers. One of these ladies, I remember I was speaking with her, and she said, "Oh, she was really like happy to answer people's question, talking about, she was really tall, really beautiful." And she said this waitress, she would get sexually harassed, and um, and then she said to have hired a bond and so forth. Then as we talk, I remember one day I prepared like salad and filmed the salad was around the meat too. And she says like, what I like is to cut meat, like I would cut dead bodies, and to eat that meat. And that calms my nervous system. I said, darling, whatever helps you. And then she tells me, my relationship with society is that they perpetually rape me and expect me to even fake an orgasm. That exactly is what I'm not willing to give, even clients. I'm like, oh. you know, that person was gaslighting me that they were having being a sex worker and being independent, kind of beat the hell out of waitressing, and having their own bodyguard and whatnot and whatnot. I was like, oh, that was just re-victimization. Thank you for gaslighting me for 3, 4, 5 years, and keeping me believing that I'm the only person that runs into these fractions of, marginalized industries, and everything seems very weird, and everybody tries to normalize that. And then she was not willing to talk to me anymore, so then she blocks me. I didn't tell her in so many words, but I was like, there was one time when I was like reminding her, hey, you told me that this was victimized you and so on and so forth. Then she wouldn't talk to me anymore and just blocked me. These same organizations that claim that they help people that are sex trafficked, but nothing about us without us traffic women. And I knew that from a lady that was trafficked, a Jewish lady trafficked by Jewish people in Israel for decades. And when she knocked down a trafficking ring that was run by a madam, none of these organizations helped her and they trafficked her. They took whatever photos they had of her and trafficked those. And they were operating as a treason cult as well. And they tried to force people to have babies, so to trap them, which brings infanticide. There were a lot of cases where women killed their infant, and people thought, oh, it was postpartum depression. Um, well, if the woman is trafficked, why would she want the baby to suffer? And when that continues for several years, what do like it creates situation that people eventually reach a point where it seems the most reasonable thing that the entire society, humanity, lineages of people who practice those practices will die. Except for the people that are against these practices. And this is, by the way, the only way to save the children, because if the people, I don't know if I could like take care of a child, um, I would definitely need to take care of me, even if everything stopped. But there are many people that couldn't have children simply because they couldn't afford them and because they were afraid that the child would be trafficked. And so they have it in them to be a parent. Those people who could definitely adopt the children that could otherwise be trafficked by the welfare system, by the way. And actually, the lineages to pass away would allow these children to meet actually able to be caring parents, and this way they would not be orphans and we would not have infanticide. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is the most humane thing. And to the people that were born by rape and actually do not find the resort in life, first of all, they could have miraculous healing when, because the discontinuation of these practices, even if by death of many lineages of all cultures and all origins and all colors, sozusagen, um, die, then people that didn't believe that they can heal can suddenly heal because the frequency of ritual abuse will be gone. And those who rape will be basically nourishing to the soil in their death.